In the wealthy village of Omar, there lived a woman named Madame Zoe. She was a widow, but not a sorrowful one. Her husband had passed many years ago, leaving behind great land, gold, and a beautiful house on the hill. But what Zoe treasured most was not the wealth, it was her only son, Caleb. From the day Caleb was born, Zoe loved him more than anything in the world. She called him my moon, my sun, and my sky. She dressed him in fine clothes from the city, fed him the best food, and gave him everything he ever asked for, even when it didn't make sense. If Caleb wants it, he shall have it, she would always say with a proud smile. As Caleb grew older, the villagers began to notice something strange. He no longer greeted elders respectfully. He shouted at servants. He refused to share toys with other children and would throw tantrums if anyone said no to him. At first, people thought he was just a strong-willed child. But soon, they realized it was more than that. Caleb was growing into a proud and selfish boy. Still, Zoe defended him with every breath. He's just energetic, she would laugh. Boys will be boys. But not everyone laughed. One of her old friends, Mama Yale, a respected elder and herbalist, tried to warn her one afternoon as they sat under the shade of a mango tree. Zoe, Mama Yale said gently, you are raising a boy without limits. One day, he will grow into a man who knows no wrong, and that will be dangerous. Zoe shook her head. You don't understand, Mama Yale. Caleb is my blessing. He's all I have left. I won't punish love. Mama Yale sighed deeply but said nothing more. She knew some lessons must be learned the hard way. By the time Caleb was 12, no one in the village wanted to deal with him. He spoke with arrogance, looked down on others, and even dared to threaten the house servants. I pay your wages, he once yelled at a gardener. If you don't listen to me, I'll tell my mother to throw you out. And that was exactly what he did. The next morning, Zoe fired the gardener without even asking for his side of the story. My son would never lie, she said. If he said you were rude, then you must be. Behind her back, villagers whispered. That boy is not right. Zoe is blind with love. She is feeding a snake with milk. But Zoe didn't care. To her, Caleb was perfect. Even when he stormed into her room at night demanding things, even when he insulted the maid, even when he refused to go to school, Zoe found a way to explain it all away. He's just stressed. He's gifted. That's why he's different. He's too clever for his teachers. It wasn't love anymore, it was blindness. Caleb, seeing that nothing he did had consequences, began to feel untouchable. And slowly, his heart turned cold. He didn't care about anyone's feelings, not even his mother's. But Zoe didn't see it. Or maybe, she didn't want to see it. And while the birds still sang over the hills of Omar, and the river still flowed with peace, something dark was beginning to grow inside the house on the hill. Something that no one, not even Zoe, was prepared for. The days passed, and the boy named Caleb continued to grow, not just in size, but in pride. By the time he was 15, the village of Omar had learned to stay away from him. Children whispered stories about his anger. Elders avoided speaking to him. Even the marketplace sellers became quiet when they saw Madame Zoe and her son coming. But still, Zoe saw none of it. Or maybe she refused to see. One morning, Mama Yale, the village elder, came to visit Zoe again. Her face was calm, but her eyes were full of worry. Zoe, she said, your son pushed one of the neighbor's children yesterday. The child was hurt badly. Zoe raised an eyebrow. That boy must have done something to Caleb first. No, Mama Yale replied softly. The boy simply refused to let Caleb take his mango. Zoe crossed her arms. Children fight. It's not a big deal. Mama Yale sighed. Zoe, you are not raising a boy, you are raising a storm. Zoe stood up. Mama I respect you, but I will not have anyone speak badly of my son. He is strong. He is bold. That is not a sin. The elder nodded, stood slowly, and spoke one last time before leaving. Even fire starts as a small spark. But if you don't put it out in time, it will burn the whole house. But Zoe didn't listen. In the weeks that followed, Caleb's behavior worsened. He began skipping school, lying to his mother about where he had been. He started locking himself in his room for hours. Sometimes at night, the house staff heard him talking to himself or walking around while everyone else slept. One day, the maid, a young girl named Fina, came to Zoe with trembling hands. "Madam," she whispered, "your son, he touched me in a wrong way." Zoe's eyes widened, but her heart refused the truth. "Fina," she said sharply, "I know you're just trying to bring shame to my family." "But madam," Fina tried to explain, her voice shaking with fear. "Enough." Zoe backed. "Pack your things. You will leave my house today." And so, Fina left in tears, and Zoe stood proudly, thinking she had protected her son once again. But whispers in the village were growing louder. Even Chief Olodo, the village leader, heard of Caleb's actions. He sent a message to Zoe. "Come with your son. Let us talk as a family. We must correct this before it becomes shameful." Zoe refused. "My son is not a wild animal to be judged by the village," she said. She didn't know that she had already lost the respect of many. In Omar, people had once spoken her name with honor. Now, they only shook their heads. She has allowed her son to grow teeth sharper than a hyena's. Her love has become poison. May the gods show her the truth before it's too late. But Zoe didn't care for their talk. She continued to praise Caleb. She continued to give him whatever he wanted. And inside their house, Caleb learned something dangerous: he could do anything, and still be forgiven. He stopped greeting his mother politely. He no longer thanked her for her gifts. He spoke to her like a servant. Still, Zoe smiled. He's just tired. He's a growing boy. But in the quiet shadows of that house, a different kind of boy was forming. Not a son. Not a man. But something cold and dangerous. By the time Caleb turned 17, he had full control over the house. He no longer asked his mother for things. He simply took them. He no longer smiled or played, his eyes had grown cold, his words sharp. But Madame Zoe still called him my sweet boy. She couldn't see what others now feared. One evening, after returning from a long day at the market, Zoe felt a headache coming on. She sank into her favorite chair, rubbing her temples. Caleb walked into the room, smiling gently. "Mama, you look tired. Let me make you something to help you sleep." Zoe looked up and smiled, touched by his concern. "You are so caring," she said. "Just like your father." Caleb went into the kitchen and returned with a steaming cup. "Drink this, Mama. It's herbal tea. It will help you rest." Zoe drank it slowly. Within minutes, her body felt heavy. Her eyes began to close, and her head drooped to one side. "Good night, Mama," Caleb whispered. From that night, it became a routine. Every evening, Caleb prepared the tea. Every evening, Zoe drank it. Every morning, she woke up feeling strange, her mind cloudy, her body tired. "I must be aging," she told herself. "Caleb is right, I need rest." But something dark was happening during those nights. Once Zoe was deep asleep, Caleb would enter her room. Slowly. Silently. Like a shadow. And he would do unspeakable things. Things no child should ever do to the woman who gave him life. At first, Caleb felt guilt. His hands trembled. His heart pounded with fear. But as the nights continued, the guilt faded. The fear disappeared. All that remained was power. He had always been told he could have anything. And now, in his twisted mind, even his mother belonged to him. One morning, Zoe awoke and sat on her bed, confused. "I had a strange dream," she whispered. In the dream, she felt someone near her. A presence. A warmth. A touch. But when she looked around, the room was still. Everything looked normal. She told Caleb about the dream that morning as he poured her breakfast. "That's just your mind playing tricks," he said sweetly. "You need more rest, Mama." And Zoe believed him. But the villagers started noticing something was wrong. Zoe no longer looked proud and strong. Her once bright eyes had grown dim. She forgot things, even names. She often wandered through the market in silence, staring at the sky. "She is not well," people whispered. But no one dared say what they truly feared, that the cause of her suffering lived in her own house. Mama Yale, who had watched it all from a distance, knew something evil was growing. She went to Zoe's house, uninvited, one afternoon. "Zoe," she said, looking into her tired face, "there is something wrong in this house. I feel it in my bones." Zoe forced a smile. "You worry too much." "No," Mama Yale said firmly. "You trust your son too blindly. And that blindness will soon break you." Zoe shook her head, too weak to argue. "Caleb loves me." Mama Yale's voice softened. "Then may the gods open your eyes before your love becomes your curse." She left, but her words hung in the air like smoke. And that night, once again, Caleb prepared the sweet drink. He stirred it slowly. Carefully. His mother drank it. And the house returned to silence. But outside, the wind howled harder. The sky grew darker. Even the moon seemed to turn its face away. Because something wicked was happening inside that house. And the spirits were beginning to take notice. The air in Omar was heavy that evening. Clouds gathered above the hills, hiding the stars. The wind blew stronger than usual, and even the birds chose silence. Inside the grand house on the hill, Caleb stirred the evening tea. He moved like a man with purpose, no smile, no warmth. Just silence and control. He crushed the dried leaves, added a bitter powder from a small pouch, and poured boiling water over it. The smell was strong, but Caleb had grown used to it. As always, he carried the cup to his mother's room. "Mama," he called gently. "Your tea." Zoe sat at her dressing table, brushing her thinning hair. She looked older than her years now, worn from sleepless nights she couldn't explain. Her hands trembled as she took the cup. "Thank you, my son," she whispered, her voice weak. Caleb watched her closely. Zoe raised the cup to her lips, but at that moment, a loud clap of thunder shook the house. She flinched, and the cup slipped from her hands, spilling its contents all over the floor. "Oh no," she gasped. Caleb's eyes widened, but he quickly hid his panic. "It's all right, Mama," he said quickly. "Let me make you another." But Zoe stood up. No. Don't bother. I'm too tired now. I'll just drink some plain water." Caleb hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes, my son. I'll be fine." She walked slowly to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and drank it. Then she returned to her room and crawled under her covers. Caleb stood outside her door, frozen. Something felt wrong. That night, for the first time in weeks, Zoe did not fall into a deep sleep. Instead, she tossed and turned, her mind drifting in and out of half-dreams. Her body felt strange, but not heavy. Suddenly, she heard a soft creak. Her eyes fluttered open. In the dim light of her moonlit room, she saw a shadow standing at the foot of her bed. Her heart stopped. "Caleb," she whispered. The figure did not move. Then, slowly, it stepped forward. She saw the face of her son, his eyes dark and unreadable. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice shaking. He said nothing. Instead, he moved closer, his hand reaching for the blanket. Zoe sat up quickly, her heart pounding. "Caleb, what are you doing?" His lips curled into a strange smile. "Mama, don't act surprised. This isn't the first time." Zoe blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Caleb stood straight now. "Come. Cold. The tea. The one that makes you sleep. I've been coming every night, Mama. You just don't remember." Zoe's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her chest tightened. Her breath caught in her throat. "You're mine," Caleb said. "No one else deserves your love like I do. No one understands you like I do." Zoe let out a cry, not of fear, but of something deeper. A cry from a soul shattered by betrayal. "Get out," she whispered. Then louder, "Get out of my room." But Caleb didn't move. "Why are you acting like this now? I've always been good to you." Zoe grabbed the lamp beside her and raised it. "Don't make me scream this house down." Something in her voice broke through to him. He stepped back. Zoe scrambled out of bed and ran out of the room barefoot, her wrapper loose around her. She ran into the night. Into the wind. Into the cold. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to get away, from the house, and from the boy she once called her treasure. Madame Zoe ran barefoot through the village, her night wrapper soaked by rain, her hair loose and wild, her breath sharp with panic. The storm above mirrored the storm within her heart. Thunder roared across the sky, but it was the sound of her son's voice that echoed louder in her ears. "You're mine, Mama, this isn't the first time." She didn't stop running until she reached the steps of the ancestral shrine, the sacred place where the village elders met during times of great trouble. The fire inside still burned, even though it was past midnight. Sitting by the flames was Mama Yil, her white headscarf wrapped tightly, her eyes calm. Zoe collapsed at her feet, trembling. He's not my son anymore," she whispered. Mama Yil didn't ask questions. She placed a shawl over Zoe's shoulders and led her inside the shrine. "Speak, daughter," she said gently. "Let your shame fall like rain, and the truth rise like the sun." Zoe's voice cracked as she told everything, the tea, the confusion, the strange dreams, the moment she woke and saw him in her room. "I thought I was loving him," she cried. "I thought I was protecting him." Mama Yil listened silently, then placed her hand on Zoe's chest. "You gave him love, yes. But you gave him without limits. Without teaching him to respect borders. And now, the tree has grown crooked." Zoe wept harder. "What do I do now?" Mama Yil stood. "Now, you must let the village carry what you can no longer hold. The matter has passed your hands. It is no longer a mother's duty, it is now the village's to judge." At dawn, the village elders gathered at the shrine. When they heard Zoe's story, a cold silence filled the room. One of the elders, Chief Olodo, slammed his walking stick on the ground. "This boy must be stopped before he brings a curse upon us all. He must face justice," another elder said. Mama Yil nodded. "Prepare yourselves. Go to the house. Bind him before the evil inside him grows any further." Back at the house, Caleb sat calmly on the front porch. He was still in the same clothes from the night before, but now he held a small knife in his hand. His eyes were empty, like a river that had dried up. When the elders and 3 guards arrived, he looked up and smiled. "Where is my mother?" he asked. "She is safe," Chief Olodo said, stepping forward. "You are not well, Caleb. You must come with us." "I'm not going anywhere," Caleb replied. "She belongs to me." "You don't understand." He rose to his feet, knife in hand. The guards moved carefully. One spoke gently. Put the knife down, son. Let's talk. Caleb laughed, a strange, hollow sound. She's mine. She loves me. She told me so. All my life. As he raised the knife, one of the guards quickly circled behind and struck his wrist. The weapon fell. Caleb fought, screamed, thrashed like a wild beast. But they held him down. Zoe arrived moments later, led by Mama Yeo. Her eyes locked with her son's. Why, Caleb, she whispered. Why did you do this? He stared at her, still smiling. Because you never said no. And in that moment, surrounded by the village and the rising sun, Zoe finally understood the curse of her love. Love without boundaries can raise a monster. And she had loved her monster, until it nearly destroyed her. The village square was silent the day Caleb was brought before the council. Even the birds stayed quiet in the trees. The people of Omar stood in a wide circle, watching as the boy they once admired was chained by the wrist and ankles. His mother, Madame Zoe, stood nearby, her head low, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights and endless tears. Chief Olodo raised his hand, and the murmuring crowd fell silent. We gather here, he said, his voice heavy, not to shame, but to seek justice. Not to punish blindly, but to open eyes before darkness spreads. Caleb stood without fear, his back straight, his mouth curled in a smirk. You're all pretending, he said loudly. You act like I'm evil, but I only did what I was allowed to do. What I was raised to do. The crowd shifted uneasily. One elder stepped forward. Caleb, did you give your mother the sleeping tea? Yes, Caleb answered, without hesitation. She needed rest. I helped her. And did you violate her trust during those nights? The elder asked, voice trembling. Caleb looked around at the villagers, then at Zoe. I gave her everything, he said simply. And she gave me everything I ever asked for. This was no different. A soft gasp rose from the crowd. Some turned away. Others covered their mouths. Zoe closed her eyes as if trying to block out the world. A tear rolled down her cheek. A village healer was called to testify. Zoe came to me broken, the woman said. She was drugged, confused, and afraid. The signs are clear. Her son used herbs meant to numb the mind. Then the village's spiritual seer, an old man with white tattoos across his forehead, came forward. He looked into Caleb's eyes and spoke. This boy has no remorse. His heart has grown wild. His mind is twisted not just by evil, but by a life without borders. He is not just sick, he is dangerous. The elders agreed. The punishment was not death. Omar was a village of wisdom, not revenge. Instead, Caleb was to be taken to the Hollow Hills Rehabilitation Center, a place deep in the forest, where troubled souls were kept under watch, guided through strict discipline, isolation, and healing if healing was even possible. As the guards prepared to take him away, Caleb looked at his mother one last time. You made me, he said, his voice cold. You taught me that I could have anything. Zoe couldn't speak. She stood frozen, as if her bones no longer held strength. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Zoe sat alone in her house. The silence felt heavier than it had ever been. She looked at Caleb's old toys, still sitting in a basket. The tiny sandals he wore as a child. A broken wooden horse he once carried everywhere. She wept, not just for her son, but for every moment she had dismissed the truth. For every time she called his misbehavior just a phase. For every warning she silenced. And in that silence, a deep voice from memory echoed back to her, Mama Yeo's words. The tree that is not shaped while young will grow into a beast too thick to cut. Zoe had waited too long to shape the tree. Now, she could only hope that somewhere, beyond the forest, her son might still find a way back to the light. A full season had passed since Caleb was taken into the forest hills, and the village of Omar slowly returned to peace. But Madame Zay did not. Her house, once filled with laughter and life, now echoed only with silence and regret. The servants were gone. The curtains stayed closed. The wind blew dust across the once polished floors. Zoe spent her days sitting by the window, staring out at the horizon, her heart aching with a pain only a mother could carry. Each day, she asked herself, "Where did I go wrong? Was it the first time I made an excuse? Or the first time I ignored a warning?" There were no easy answers, only memories that cut deeper than any blade. One afternoon, Mama Yeo came to visit. She found Zoe sitting by the fire, quiet and thin. "Zoe," she said, "you cannot stay in this silence forever." "What should I do, Mama?" Zoe asked softly. "I failed my son. I failed myself." Mama Yeo sat beside her and held her hand. "Then teach others not to walk the same path. Turn your pain into a bridge. Let others cross it before they fall." Zoe looked at the old woman, and for the first time in many days, something stirred in her eyes, a spark of purpose. Weeks later, Zoe stood in front of a small gathering of women in the village square. They came from different homes, carrying children of all ages. Some came out of curiosity, some came with judgment, and some with quiet fear. Zoe raised her voice, not with pride, but with truth. "I am Zoe. I was once praised as a good mother. I gave my son the world, but I forgot to give him something more important: discipline, limits, and accountability." The women listened closely. "I defended him when he hurt others. I excused him when he disrespected his elders. I thought I was protecting him, but I was feeding a fire that eventually burned me." Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't hide them. Love is not blind. Love sees the flaws and still teaches the child to grow straight. Love doesn't mean saying yes to everything. Sometimes, love must say no. The crowd was silent. Many women cried. A few nodded, as if they too had stories locked inside their hearts. From that day on, Zoe began walking from village to village, sharing her story. She spoke in markets, at schools, in shrines, and under trees. She helped mothers find strength to correct their children early. She encouraged fathers to be present. She begged communities to unite when they saw signs of darkness in a child. Her voice became a lantern for those walking blindly in the dark. As for Caleb, he remained in the Hollow Hills Rehabilitation Center. Some said he grew calmer over time. Others said his eyes never softened. Zoe never visited him, but she prayed for him every night. Not because she had hope in what he was, but because she still believed in what he could have been if only someone had said no early enough. And so, the story of Madame Zoe and her son Caleb lived on, not as gossip, but as a lesson whispered between mothers and daughters, fathers and sons. Discipline your child with love. Or one day, love may be the very thing that destroys you.